A lot of people have asked me for my thoughts on this fight, Bryant Jennings versus Luis Ortiz. It's an interesting one because when you run a, let's be honest, a fairly modest, small-sized YouTube channel like I do, when you get multiple requests to discuss the same fight over and over again, it kind of tells you that this is deemed by the boxing public to be a relevant fight. And I really have been surprised by the amount of comments on my videos and the amount of tweets and Facebook messages asking to hear some discussion about this particular matchup. To answer the question directly, what are my thoughts on Luis Ortiz versus Bryant Jennings? I don't actually... I've got a lot of thoughts about it. I haven't made up a clear decision in my head as to whether Luis Ortiz is the second coming of Muhammad Ali yet, you know. I'm still somewhat on the fence about him, but I'll explain that throughout the course of this video and hopefully we'll get there. First and foremost, Luis Ortiz put in a very, very good performance against Bryant Jennings. To knock out Bryant Jennings and to be clearly outpointing him until the point of the knockout is very, very strong form. In the context of today's heavyweight division, in my mind, Luis Ortiz is the 5th best heavyweight on the planet in terms of my rankings. Let me explain that. Tyson Fury #1, I think that's fairly obvious. Vladimir Klitschko #2, again, I think that's a pick that almost makes itself, fairly obvious. And I think you can have Povetkin or Wilder in any order, ranked 3 or 4. Don't really have an issue if you say Wilder's the 3rd or Povetkin's the 3rd. I think Luis Ortiz is #5. I think this performance against Bryant Jennings, who's only lost once on points to Vladimir Klitschko, is, you know, really, really impressive. And just below Ortiz, you know, that kind of 6 to 10 bracket, there's a few names: Kubrat Pulev, Bryant Stavern, Bryant Jennings himself, Chigayev, Carlos Takam. You know, those would make up my top 10 really. But let's put it this way: Ortiz did a much better job on Bryant Jennings than Vladimir Klitschko did. I thought Jennings had greater spells of effectiveness against Vladimir Klitschko, and I also think that the fact Luis Ortiz was able to stop Bryant Jennings, who had been 12 against Vladimir Klitschko, is highly, highly impressive. You know, Bryant Jennings has legit one of the top chins in the heavyweight business. You know, there's a few guys out there. But Bryant Stavern has another excellent chin. You know, I know he got dropped by Derek Rossi, but on the whole, he's got a good chin. And I should have included Bryant Stavern in my top 10 heavyweight list towards the bottom there. But Bryant Stavern, Alexander Povetkin, Bryant Jennings, you know, these guys are some of the best proven chins in the business. And for me, the way Luis Ortiz was able to get Jennings out of there was really, really impressive. Let me talk about some of the things I like about Ortiz. Obviously, he's got that slick, awkward Cuban amateur background. That makes him a difficult man to fight to begin with. You know, we've seen a lot of good Cuban amateur heavyweights come very close to the top, but not quite make it. Mike Perez, Odilon Solis, you know, those are both names that really were guys most people thought would make it to the very, very top and came up short. Luis Ortiz, I sense, is possibly better than both of those two guys put together. His placement and selection of punches is superb. I know it sounds like a weird thing to say for a professional boxer, but he knows the best shot to throw and the best precise location on his opponent to land there at any given point. He's not the speediest guy in the world in terms of his hand speed or his foot speed, but in terms of his brain speed, you know, he sees a gap and instantly throws an uppercut on the inside. He sees a gap and instantly throws a hook to the body. And his placement and accuracy is superb. Let me say, I already think Luis Ortiz is one of the top body punchers in the heavyweight division. Maybe even the very top body puncher in the heavyweight division. This is a guy who really, really does not neglect the body. And he throws excellent punches to the body. He's got a good straight left to the body. He's got a good hook with either hand to the body. You know, his placement of shots to the body and his timing is superb. When he gets an opponent hurt, he isn't over-eager trying to stop them. He remembers the body. You know, really, really, really superb body puncher, superb accuracy, and superb placement of shots. He's got real punch variety as well. You know, his straight left cross is a weapon from range. You know, this is not a guy who is a pure inside fighter. He's a guy who can box well from range as well. And he's got ferocious power. Ferocious power. I mean, he had Bryant Jennings all over the place in round one. Reminiscent of the Anthony Joshua Dillian White fight, actually. You know, the first round, Jennings stays on his feet, but Luis Ortiz looks totally in control for me. And Jennings looked wobbled, hurt, looked slightly out of his depth against Luis Ortiz. You know, Ortiz was boxing long and then closing down the distance and coming inside on Jennings. And Jennings felt the power straight away and became very low output instantly as a response, you know. Very low output. You know, it's a real impressive performance from Luis Ortiz. Let's talk about the negatives. Because on the whole, this was clearly an impressive performance. But as with any performance, there are room for improvement. The Ortiz jab, and I think this is going to be particularly relevant when he fights taller opponents. You know, Klitschko, Wilder, Fury. These guys are all going to have a height advantage, a reach advantage. I don't rate the Ortiz jab. At times, it's quite slow, quite ponderous. It's not the battering ram you'd expect it to be if you look at his other punches. You know, sometimes he kind of just flicks it out, and it's slow. It's slow. I think defensively, he's actually quite good. You know, he's got decent reactions. His head movement is like reasonable in terms of reaction. He judges defensive angles very well. You know, he's one of these guys who can fight with his hands slightly lower. He doesn't have a tight guard, but you know, he's a reactive fighter. Defensively, he's there. Offensively, he's there. The jab is not elite. You know, this guy doesn't have a Vladimir Klitschko jab. You know, I'm picking holes here. Obviously, very few fighters can have a Vladimir Klitschko jab. But, you know, that's one thing I've got to say. That would be one area that I'd talk about. He's not the fastest fighter in terms of his foot movement. You know, what he does is judges the angles very well. He cuts down the ring very well. You know, he'll be throwing on an opponent and then he'll pivot to the left and start throwing to open up new angles. He's exceptional at that, but he isn't, you know, whilst you see him up on his toes and dancing around like Muhammad Ali, which is all very impressive, I don't feel he is the fastest mover around the whole width of the ring. But, you know, as I say, I am picking holes here. The major concern with Luis Ortiz, having seen his performance, though, is stamina. You know, a lot's been made of the fact he grew tired towards the end of the fight. And I actually think, funnily enough, in a manner that is somewhat reminiscent of when David Haye knocked out Derek Chisora. The person who got knocked out, in this case Bryant Jennings, was just starting to come into the fight at the point of the stoppage. You know, Jennings' best round was the 7th round, the round he got stopped in. Jennings was the more athletic guy. Jennings had the better stamina. Jennings seemed to be the fitter guy. And he was coming on really strong. Now, just as David Haye did when he fought Chisora, at that precise moment, Luis Ortiz found that extra level and was able to stop his opponent. You know, hitting him with 3 or 4 fantastic uppercuts on the inside. And then forcing the stoppage. And let me say, credit to Bryant Jennings for getting up from those uppercuts. He went down like he'd been, you know, hit by a bullet, but managed to get back up and was stopped on his feet, showing tremendous heart. But that is my concern with Luis Ortiz, really. You know, that is my concern with him. I'm going to talk about Luis Ortiz versus various opponents out there in the division in just a moment. Before I get there, Bryant Jennings can come again. You know, Bryant Jennings is a good fighter. He's had 2 very tough fights back to back. And I think he should drop down in level, get 3 or 4 wins and try and work on new things with his new trainer, John David Jackson. Just when we're talking about his new trainer, John David Jackson, let me say, John David Jackson is a good trainer. He is. But I think he got this one wrong. When Chris Algieri fought Amir Khan, Algieri is trained by David Jackson. I said to myself, how can Chris Algieri have any chance in this fight? The way to beat Amir Khan is to get inside, put him on his back foot. You can't box long, throwing long 1-2s with Amir Khan. And I thought that's what Chris Algieri was going to do. But instead, Chris Algieri took the fight to Khan, pushed him back. John David Jackson in one training camp revolutionised this game. I think they tried similar tactics here in this fight. Bryant Jennings is a guy I've always viewed as a mover, a dancer, someone who'd box on the back foot. What he was doing here was not typical Bryant Jennings. He was trying to fight on the inside. He was trying to turn the fight into a scrap. He was trying to get close to Luis Ortiz. I felt that didn't play into Bryant Jennings' skill set. Jennings is not a big puncher. He's not got the amateur pedigree of a Luis Ortiz for that inside scrapping. For me, Jennings' best attribute is his athleticism and his legs. And he negated those attributes by fighting so close to Luis Ortiz. Actually, he took out the one area of the game where he was clearly the superior operator, which was the outside movement. So I thought that was poor tactics from Bryant Jennings. He was up against a guy who hadn't been late in fights and he was too reliant on power. I thought what he should have done is made Luis Ortiz chase him. Make Luis Ortiz follow him round the ring. Box on the back foot, catch him with the jab, frustrate him, wear him down, drag him deep, make him get to that 8th, 9th, 10th round. Because that's when you could see the collapse from Luis Ortiz. As I say, the signs were there in the 7th round that Jennings could come on strong here. Who knows if Ortiz would have lasted the distance. He's not a young guy, he's got no experience of going lates in fights, and he's got a very, very heavy set build and frame. For me, that was where a key error from Bryant Jennings. I'm not saying he would have won. Luis Ortiz was clearly the superior operator on the night. But I thought that was John David Jackson trying to use similar tactics to what he'd done when Chris Algieri fought Khan. And I thought that was wrong on this case. So I think he needs to drop down a few levels, Bryant Jennings. Have 3 or 4 comeback fights, stay active, and build himself back up again, work on a few things before moving back to top 10, because you don't want to have 2 back-to-back losses. If he starts having 1 or 2 more losses now, it's time to think about hanging him up. So I think there's scope to take him back a step, rebuild him, give him 1 or 2 fights against top 20, top 30 opponents, and then have a look at building him up again for another big fight. As for Luis Ortiz, on this performance, I do rate him number 5 in the heavyweight division. And he's a dangerous guy. As I say, I believe he may be the best body puncher in the heavyweight division. He's Cuban with an extensive amateur background. He's a slick southpaw. He's got brilliant straight left, an excellent uppercut on the inside, decent defensive skills. This guy is a real problem. How do I see him doing against the top operators out there? Deontay Wilder, I'd make Ortiz a slight favourite. I think Wilder can box on the back foot and is more athletic than Ortiz. And whilst Ortiz appears to have a good chin, I've never seen him hurt in a fight. And I've actually been watching Ortiz for a little while now. He hasn't really fought a big puncher like Wilder. So I wouldn't rule Wilder out of the fight, but I'd make Luis Ortiz a favourite. I just don't think Wilder would be able to stand up to those perfectly placed body punches and fantastic inside uppercuts that Ortiz throws. I think Ortiz just has more pedigree, more technical capability, and more boxing understanding than Wilder. I make Ortiz a 65 to 70% favourite in that fight. Ruslan Chagayev is a fight that is being talked about, with Ortiz having some version of the WBA title. Let me say I'd make Ortiz a big favourite over Chagayev. I know Chagayev looked pretty devastating against Pianeta, but over the last few years I've seen a gradual decline in Chagayev. Slower, more ponderous, heavier on his feet. And I just think that Ortiz would be able to dominate him and probably stop him, to be honest. Stop him late, make him retire on his stool. I just don't think Chagayev, being a shorter, stocky, older heavyweight, has got the style to beat him. Funnily enough, one fight that I would make Luis Ortiz the underdog in is Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury has better outside footwork than Luis Ortiz. He's got a longer and a better jab than Luis Ortiz. You know, we saw how he took away the Klitschko jab. I think he'd do the same to Luis Ortiz. Tyson Fury has an advanced inside game. And I just think he could be the kind of guy to drown Ortiz by taking Ortiz late, making Ortiz use up a lot of energy by chasing him, throwing a lot of lever that isn't necessarily causing problems for Fury because of his back foot game and his defences. And I think Fury could possibly capitalise on Ortiz's advanced years and, you know, questionable stamina by coming on a lot stronger in that fight. You know, Ortiz has a good chance against any fighter in the world. You know, he's a top operator. But I make Tyson Fury a favourite in that fight. But, you know, Ortiz is a real problem, and he's one of these guys. It's going to be hard for him to get fights like Bryant Jennings without selling out a huge amount of money, because there's no risk reward to fighting Luis Ortiz. He's still not a huge name outside of the boxing hardcore. He's not someone who's going to fill out big arenas due to his ticket sales. But he's a very hard fight. Someone like Tyson Fury could fight Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua, David Haye, and get £5 million. Or he could fight Luis Ortiz, who's possibly the most dangerous of the lot, you know, for a quarter of the money, or a third of the money. I think that's the problem Luis Ortiz is going to face. But the WBA title, very confusing. You know, you've got interim titles, regular titles, super titles. You've got Lucas Brown in the mix, Chigayev in the mix. Who knows what the state of play is there. But I think Ortiz is going to get some sort of fight at some point, you know, on the WBA route. We shall see. But, yeah, very, very impressive performance from Luis Ortiz. If Luis Ortiz was 2 or 3 years younger, I'd really be thinking he could be a dominant heavyweight champion. But I think it's going to be hard for him to get fights now. I think he's in his late 30s already, and I think he's going to have to expect longer gaps between his fights as he steps up in class. And I just think by the time he gets to a Tyson Fury or a Deontay Wilder, he could be 38, 39 against guys in the prime of their life. And I just think with his stamina, with his slightly slower footwork, slightly slower movement around the ring, I think that might be the problem for him. Bryant Jennings, credit to him, good performance, fought the wrong fight but got beaten by the better man, and he can come again. Let me know your thoughts. Do hope you've enjoyed this video. Many thanks for watching as always.